She drove 9 hours through pouring rain to stand at her own sister's wedding. But when she reached the tall doors of that grand country club, her own parents stepped into the doorway and blocked her path. Family members only, her mother told her coldly. You can watch it on the live stream from your car in the parking lot. The woman in the military dress uniform did not scream. She did not cry. She simply turned, walked back into the rain and drove away. And 2 days later, when a $35,000 wedding bill suddenly bounced in front of a room full of wealthy guests, the same family that had called her a stranger would be screaming her name, begging her to save them. They had no idea who they had just thrown out into the dark. Before I tell you this story, let me know down in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated exactly what you were worth, hit that like button and subscribe, and stay with me right to the end, because the moment everything turns is one you will not want to miss. My name is Noyet. Out here, the morning began the way most of my mornings do, with the mist still sitting low over the rice fields and the air smelling of wet earth. Today I went down to the far edge of the garden to harvest chilies. The plants were heavy with them, bright red peppers hanging like little lanterns under the green leaves, and I worked slowly, snapping each one free and dropping it into the woven basket on my hip. It is quiet work. You crouch low, you part the leaves with your fingers, and you let your mind wander while the basket fills with red. People who don't grow chilies always make the same mistake. They look at the small ones, the quiet little peppers tucked deep under the leaves, and they think those are the harmless ones. They reach for the big showy peppers up front and leave the small ones behind. But any farmer here will tell you the truth. It is very often the smallest, quietest pepper in the basket that carries the most fire. You can hold it in your palm and feel nothing. And then one day it catches the back of your throat and burns long after you have swallowed. I thought about that today with my hands full of red, because the story I want to tell you is about a woman exactly like that. A woman her own family looked at and decided was small. Plain. Harmless. A disappointment they could push to the back of the basket and forget about. They spent her whole life underestimating the quiet one, and they never once stopped to wonder what kind of fire was growing inside her. You reap what you plant. That is the one rule the soil never breaks. And this family had been planting cruelty in that quiet daughter for 34 years. So let me tell you what they finally harvested. Her name was Tessa. She was 34 years old, and on the day this story begins, she was driving 9 hours straight from her military base toward Washington, D.C., to watch her younger sister get married. The drive had been brutal. She had spent the whole way gripping the steering wheel of her modest sedan, fighting through heavy interstate traffic and sheets of pouring rain just to make it on time. Her dress uniform hung perfectly pressed in the back of the car. She had changed in a gas station bathroom 20 miles outside the city, making sure every metal and pin sat exactly where it belonged. Her bones ached from a grueling deployment overseas, and the jet lag was still tugging at the edges of her focus. But this was her sister Ashley getting married. And you show up for family. That was what Tessa had always been taught, even if that same family had never once seemed to show up for her. The venue was an exclusive country club in the heart of the city, the kind of place that screamed old money and closed doors. Massive white columns held up a pristine portico, and valet drivers in sharp vests were busy parking long lines of imported luxury cars. Tessa pulled her plain sedan into a space far in the back of the lot, took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and tried to ignore the small knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Growing up in a household ruled by her mother Barbara and her father William had meant living under a microscope. Everything in that family was about appearances. Everything was about projecting the perfect image to their wealthy social circle. And Tessa had never once fit that image. She was practical, straightforward, and she had chosen the military over the polished corporate ladder her parents had envisioned for her. Ashley, on the other hand, was their masterpiece. Ashley was the golden child, groomed for high society, molded perfectly to their every expectation. What none of them knew, what Tessa had never bothered to correct, was that the daughter they dismissed as a glorified warehouse worker was in fact the chief executive officer of a thriving defense logistics firm. She had built it from nothing, while serving in the reserves, into a company managing multimillion-dollar government supply contracts across 3 continents. To her parents she was just Tessa, the disappointment who wore combat boots instead of high heels. They had no idea she owned the warehouses. They had no idea she owned the transport fleets. They had no idea she owned the entire company. Tessa walked toward the grand oak doors, the humid evening air carrying the sound of a string quartet drifting from the main ballroom. Warm amber light spilled through the tall glass windows, and she could see guests mingling in the foyer, holding crystal glasses of champagne, draped in designer gowns that cost more than her monthly salary. She smoothed her jacket, feeling a quiet flicker of pride in the uniform she had earned. She had built a real place for herself in the world. She did not need this room's approval. But as she reached the top of the marble steps and the heavy doors swung open, it was not a welcoming committee waiting for her. It was her parents. Barbara stepped directly into the center of the doorway, arms crossed tight against her chest, wearing a tailored silver dress that shimmered under the portico lights. William stood just behind her shoulder, his jaw set hard. Together they looked less like proud parents and more like 2 bouncers guarding the door of a private lounge. "Hello, Mom," Tessa said, forcing a polite smile. "I know I'm cutting it close, the traffic on the interstate was terrible." Her mother did not smile back. Barbara's eyes swept slowly over her daughter, starting at her polished shoes and traveling up to the medals on her chest, and her upper lip curled in open disgust. "What are you wearing, Tessa?" "It's my dress uniform," Tessa replied, confusion slowing her thoughts for a moment. "I just got off duty. I drove straight here." Barbara let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You cannot go inside looking like that. This is a black tie wedding. You look like a security guard." Tessa stared at her, the exhaustion suddenly feeling much heavier on her shoulders. "Mom, I am an officer in the United States military. This is the highest formal attire I own. I am allowed to wear this to formal events." William stepped forward, pointing a thick finger at her chest. "We are not talking about military regulations," he said. "We are talking about social decency. Colin comes from a very prominent family. His parents are hosting governors and senators here tonight. You showing up in that get-up is an arrogant cry for attention. You are just trying to upstage your sister on her special day." A cold knot formed in Tessa's stomach. "Upstage her? I drove 9 hours just to sit in the back row and cheer for her. I am not trying to upstage anyone. I just want to see my sister get married." "You are socially unfit to be in that room," Barbara stated, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper so the valet drivers would not overhear. "You do not know how to mingle with these people. You will make us look ridiculous. We told Colin's family that you were working overseas and could not make it. Your presence here is a massive distraction." The words hung in the humid air. Socially unfit. A massive distraction. They had actively lied to the groom's family to hide her existence. Tessa looked past her mother and caught a glimpse of Ashley inside, laughing in the foyer, radiant in her custom white gown, surrounded by bridesmaids in matching blush silk. For 1 second, Ashley glanced toward the doors and made direct eye contact with her older sister. And then very deliberately she turned her back, pretending she had not seen anything at all. Barbara reached over and tapped a small plastic placard sitting on a table near the coat check. It had a black and white square printed on it. "Scan this," she commanded. "It is a QR code for the wedding live stream. You can watch the ceremony from your car in the parking lot. Family members only inside." Family members only. The phrase echoed in Tessa's mind. She did not scream. She did not cry. Years of military discipline, layered over a lifetime of emotional neglect, had taught her exactly how to lock her reactions down to nothing. She looked at the little QR code, then back at her mother's perfectly powdered face. And instead of begging for entry, she let the long history between them choose her response. Family only, she said, her voice dangerously calm. Just like how you made me watch Ashley's college graduation from the parking lot, because my car wasn't nice enough to be seen near the venue for the family photos. Barbara flinched just slightly before her face hardened again. That was different. We had an image to maintain for the Alumni Association. And just like when you left me sitting alone at the enlistment center 5 years ago, Tessa continued, taking a step back from the door, because Ashley had a crisis over her cheerleading outfit. William scoffed. Do not play the victim, Tessa. Just go to your car, watch the stream, and we will call you when they cut the cake. Maybe you can come around to the back door and we'll bring you a slice. Tessa gave them a crisp, perfectly executed military nod. Message received, she said quietly. Then she turned on her heel and began walking back down the marble steps. She did not look back. She did not wait to see if either of them felt a flicker of remorse. She already knew the answer. They were probably relieved. The walk back across the dark, rain-slicked parking lot felt completely different from the walk in. The heavy exhaustion in her bones had been replaced by a sharp, crystal-clear focus. For years she had bent over backward to accommodate their demands. She had swallowed their insults, ignored their obvious favoritism, and convinced herself that one day, somehow, they would finally respect her. And now, crossing that dark asphalt, she finally accepted the truth she had spent 34 years avoiding. They would never see her as family. They only ever saw her as a resource. She unlocked her modest sedan and slid into the driver's seat. The quiet interior felt like a sanctuary. She sat in the darkness for a long moment, listening to the faint string quartet playing a joyful tune for the guests inside, picturing the lavish floral arrangements, the imported champagne, the enormous catering spread waiting for all of them. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She opened her secure corporate banking app. The screen glowed bright in the dark car. She navigated to the user management section. 3 years earlier, right before a dangerous deployment to Kuwait, she had given her parents a high-limit corporate credit card tied to her logistics firm. She had looked her father in the eye and told him exactly what it was for. This is the emergency family card, she had said. Medical emergencies only. If someone breaks a leg, if mom needs surgery, if the roof collapses and you need a hotel, use this. Do not worry about the limit. Just keep yourselves safe until I get back. She had trusted them. She had wanted so badly to believe that under all the country club posturing, they were still her parents. But the recent transaction history on the screen told a very different story. There were massive pending charges for a luxury bridal boutique. Thousands of dollars at a premium country club. A huge authorization hold for a high-end catering company. They had been funding this entire extravagant wedding on her company's credit line, assuming she was too busy or too stupid to ever notice. She stared at a single button on the screen. It was a simple red rectangle that read, "Freeze all authorized users." Her thumb hovered over the glass. Her mother had just stood in front of her, looked her in the eye, and explicitly stated that she was not family, and company policy strictly prohibited non-family members from using corporate assets. She was simply enforcing the rules. She pressed the red button. A confirmation message appeared. All associated cards are now frozen. Transactions will be declined. She put the car in gear, glanced one last time at the glowing windows of the country club in her rearview mirror, and whispered into the empty car, "Enjoy the reception." Then she merged onto the highway and began the long drive back to her real life. The highway stretched ahead of her, an endless ribbon of wet asphalt cutting through the dark Virginia night. Rain hammered the windshield, but the steady sweep of the wipers was the only sound she allowed herself to hear. She did not turn on the radio. She did not cry. Crying was a luxury you lost somewhere between basic training and your first overseas deployment. Instead, she let the heavy silence wash over her, slowly clearing away the toxic residue of that doorway. Her parents had spent the last decade telling anyone who would listen that their daughter worked a glorified warehouse job. They told their wealthy friends she moved boxes around for the government, a polite, condescending way of calling her blue-collar labor. They never once bothered to learn the actual name of her company. If they had, they might have recognized Vanguard Defense Logistics. They might have realized she did not move cardboard boxes. She managed complex international supply chains for elite military contractors. She owned the warehouses. She owned the transport fleets. She owned the entire firm. But they much preferred their fabricated version of reality. The neat little story where Ashley was the brilliant, beautiful success, and Tessa was the rugged, uncultured disappointment. She pulled off at a quiet, deserted rest stop, the neon signs reflecting off the wet pavement, and she opened her banking app one more time, scrolling slowly through the pending charges of just the last week. There was a $12,000 charge for imported white orchids from a luxury florist downtown, an $8,000 authorization for a custom champagne tower and cases of vintage wine, a $15,000 deposit for elite catering, charges for designer shoes, for spa treatments, for luxury car rentals. They had been using her emergency combat card, the money she had earned sleeping in barracks and managing supply drops in the desert heat, to fund Ashley's dream wedding from top to bottom. Her heartbeat settled into a slow, steady, mechanical rhythm. They had turned her away at the door just hours ago. They had looked at her dress uniform, the very uniform she had been wearing while earning the money they were now spending, and they had told her she was not family. She watched the pending charges on the catering, the flowers, the champagne shift one by one from black text to gray. Declined. Cancelled. Frozen. The digital trail of their extravagant theft simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but denied authorization codes. She set the phone down, pulled back onto the highway, and for the first time in 34 years, the tight knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest finally unspooled. She felt completely, utterly free. 48 hours passed in a blur of productive, highly profitable work, and the wedding weekend melted away into a busy Monday morning at Vanguard headquarters. Tessa sat at the head of her mahogany desk in her spacious corner office, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling shipping yard. She wore a sharp navy business suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek professional twist, a stark contrast to the uniform she had worn Saturday night. Her desk was covered in complex schematics and secure tablets. She was in the middle of finalizing a $40 million supply chain contract for a new fleet of armored transport vehicles, and her executive team had been operating at peak capacity all morning. Her head of security, a former Marine named Jackson, knocked briefly on the glass door to drop off the final compliance reports. They exchanged a quick nod of mutual respect before he stepped out. Tessa reviewed the final clauses, signed her name at the bottom of the digital document, and hit send. A deep sense of professional satisfaction settled over her shoulders. She had built this empire from the ground up on pure grit, sharp intelligence, and the unwavering loyalty of her military colleagues. She did not need country club approval. She had real power. Just as she took a sip of her black coffee, her personal cell phone lit up on the edge of the desk. The screen flashed with her mother's name. She watched it vibrate, the sound buzzing aggressively against the wood, and she let it ring, stopped, then immediately started again. Barbara was calling back to back, a sign of absolute, unfiltered desperation. She never called during business hours unless she had something to brag about, and she certainly never called twice. The phone rang a third time, then a fourth. On the fifth consecutive ring, Tessa calmly pressed accept, leaned back in her chair, and said nothing at all. She just listened. "Tessa!" Her mother screamed into the receiver, her voice shrill and completely stripped of its usual refined composure. She sounded like a cornered animal clawing for an escape route. "Tessa, you need to call your bank right now." Tessa held the phone slightly away from her ear. The background noise on the other end was pure chaos. People shouting, the clatter of silverware dropping on tile, and Ashley crying hysterically somewhere in the distance. It sounded like a full-scale riot breaking out inside a five-star restaurant. She took another slow sip of her coffee. "Why would I need to call my bank, Mom?" "Fix the glitch." Barbara shrieked, her breathing ragged. "There is a glitch on the emergency card, and you need to fix it right now before Colin's family finds out what is happening." The venue manager just locked the doors to the private dining room. "They are refusing to let the guests leave the farewell brunch. The caterers are threatening to call the police, Tessa." The final $35,000 charge bounced. "Fix it immediately." In the background, Tessa could hear a man, likely the venue manager, firmly demanding a valid form of payment, his voice cutting through the murmurs of confused, wealthy guests. Ashley wailed louder, screaming that her perfect exit had been ruined. The panic in her mother's voice was a sharp contrast to the cruel, arrogant woman who had blocked her path 48 hours earlier. Barbara had built her entire social standing on the illusion of limitless wealth, and now that illusion was collapsing in front of the very people she was most desperate to impress. Tessa looked out at her shipping yard, watching a massive cargo truck roll through the secure gates of Vanguard Defense Logistics. She took one slow, deliberate breath, letting the reality of her own power settle into her bones. "There is no glitch, Mom," she said, her voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Corporate cards are strictly reserved for family emergencies. You told me to my face at the door that I was not family. Therefore, company policy strictly prohibits non-family members from using corporate assets." The line went dead for a few seconds. Tessa could hear her mother's sharp intake of breath. When Barbara finally spoke, her voice had dropped its hysterical pitch and morphed into a low, venomous hiss. "Are you out of your mind?" she demanded. "You are holding your own sister hostage over a petty grudge. Colin's parents are sitting in that dining room right now, waiting for brunch. The caterer is standing in front of the buffet, refusing to serve a single plate until the $35,000 payment clears. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us?" Tessa tapped her mouse, waking her monitor, and opened the frozen account ledger. "It is not a grudge, Mom. It is basic corporate compliance. You attempted to run a $35,000 charge on a business account that was explicitly designated for life-or-death medical emergencies. You are not bleeding out in an emergency room. You are trying to buy imported truffles and mimosa towers. I am simply preventing corporate fraud." "Fraud?" Barbara shrieked, abandoning any attempt at whispering. "We are your parents. We raised you. You gave us that card to take care of family matters, and this wedding is a family matter. You are wealthy now, Tessa. We know you make decent money at that logistics place. You can afford to fix this. Call the bank and authorize the transaction before Ashley has a complete breakdown on her first morning as a married woman." Tessa kept her voice perfectly flat. "Ashley's emotional state is not my responsibility," she said. "And you are right about one thing, I can afford it. But I will not pay a single cent. 2 days ago I drove 9 hours straight from a military base to celebrate my sister. I drove through torrential rain just to be there. I stood on the marble steps of that venue, completely exhausted, in the dress uniform I earned serving this country, and you looked me up and down like I was a piece of trash. You pointed at a plastic sign and told me to watch the ceremony from my car. You told me I was not family. You cannot disown me on Saturday night, and then expect me to fund your luxury brunch on Monday morning. There was a sudden scuffling sound, and then her father's voice boomed through the speaker. William was furious, his voice carrying the heavy, intimidating authority he had used to control their household for decades. He thought he could bully her into submission just like when she was a teenager. "Listen to me very carefully, Tessa," William growled. "You are going to call your bank, and you are going to lift the freeze on that card this exact second. You are not going to disrespect your mother, and you are not going to ruin your sister's wedding weekend over some pathetic temper tantrum." Tessa took another slow sip of her coffee. "Hello to you too, Dad." The answer is still no. William lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "You think you hold all the cards because you manage some warehouse over in Virginia. You think playing soldier makes you tough. If you do not authorize this $35,000 payment right now, I am going to make a phone call that will ruin your life. I am going to call your commanding officer. I will report you for elder abuse. I will tell them you are financially neglecting your parents and committing fraud. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and unfit to serve. I will have you stripped of your rank and fired from your little warehouse job before the sun goes down." Tessa sat in her spacious office, looking at the $40 million government defense contract resting on her desk. She thought about the hundreds of employees who worked for her, about the global supply network she controlled. Her father truly believed she was a low-level employee scraping by in a dusty warehouse. He genuinely thought his country club connections gave him the power to crush her. He had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. A slow, sharp smile spread across her face. "Go ahead, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a calm, terrifying whisper. "But you should probably understand how corporate credit cards actually work before you make that call. You see, an employee cannot freeze a corporate account. Only the owner can do that. I did not report a card stolen to some bank teller. I shut it down through the executive portal." "What are you talking about?" William demanded, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Just unfreeze the card before I make the call." "I am talking about reality, Dad. You think I work in a warehouse. I own the warehouse. I own the transport trucks. I own the entire firm. You are standing in a country club trying to pay a caterer with stolen funds, and you are threatening to get me fired from my own company. Go ahead and call the police. Call the military. Call whoever you want, and tell them you committed credit card fraud using an account that belongs to the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Defense Logistics. Because that is me. I own the company. I authorize the charges. And I am telling you right now, you are cut off." She did not wait for his response. She pressed the end call button and set the phone face down on her desk. For exactly 60 seconds, the device lay perfectly still. Then the vibration started again. Not a call this time, but a relentless barrage of notifications. Tessa picked up the phone. A new voicemail from Ashley had just landed, marked urgent. She pressed play and put it on speaker, letting her sister's shrill, frantic voice fill the office. Ashley was not just crying. She was hyperventilating with rage. "You ruined my life, Tessa," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You ruined my perfect day." Colin's parents had to pay the caterer with their personal check, while the staff held our luggage hostage. Do you know how humiliating that is? You are just a jealous, bitter spinster. You could not stand to see me happy because no one will ever love you. You did this out of pure spite because you have nothing else in your pathetic life. Unfreeze the card and wire the money to Colin's father, or I swear I will never speak to you again. The recording ended with a sharp click. Tessa did not feel a single shred of guilt. If anything, the voicemail solidified her resolve. She swiped over to her text messages, and within the hour she could see that her mother had mobilized the entire extended family into a digital assault. Aunt Patricia texted to call her a deadbeat sister and a disgrace to the family name. Cousin Greg sent a block of text accusing her of sabotaging a sacred wedding out of jealousy. Uncle Richard left a voice note calling her a heartless monster for giving her mother heart palpitations in a crowded foyer. They had all bought into Barbara and Ashley's fabricated narrative completely, certain that she had waited until the farewell brunch to pull the financial rug out simply to cause maximum public damage. Ashley had even posted a long, tearful status update to her thousands of followers, vaguely referencing a toxic, jealous family member who had tried to destroy her marriage out of spite. Tessa did not reply to a single message. Years of military leadership had taught her that arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you is a waste of tactical resources. She switched her phone to silent, disabled every notification, and dropped the device into her bottom desk drawer. Then she turned back to her dual monitors, logged into the Vanguard Central Financial Portal with her executive credentials, and typed the routing number of the emergency family card into the search bar. For 3 years, while she was navigating sandstorms and securing dangerous supply routes overseas, she had completely ignored this account. She had trusted her parents. She had assumed the few mobile alerts she saw in passing were legitimate copays or household emergencies. Now, sitting in the safety of her office, she was looking at the raw, unfiltered truth of their betrayal. She downloaded every receipt, every invoice, every statement tied to that card for the last 5 years. And the deeper she dug, the more disgusted she became. The unauthorized spending had started small, a few $100s here and there at high-end grocery stores and spas. They had been testing the waters, seeing if she would notice. When she stayed silent, the floodgates opened. There was an $8,000 charge for a country club membership initiation, tens of thousands of dollars at elite designer boutiques. She opened a second window and matched the transaction dates to photos Ashley had posted publicly. The designer leather bag her sister had flaunted last Christmas had been paid for by Tessa's company. The imported caviar and premium champagne at their lavish garden parties had been funded entirely by her combat pay. There was a staggering $12,000 charge from a European travel agency, authorized right around the time Ashley claimed she was on a soul-searching trip through Italy and France after dropping out of her master's program. She had not paid for that trip herself. She had found Tessa's corporate credit line. Tessa did not just look at the numbers. She documented them with absolute precision. She created a secure encrypted file, dragged every fraudulent receipt and invoice into a master folder, and used her logistics tracking software to organize the data chronologically, highlighting the most egregious purchases in bright yellow. She compiled a bulletproof 50-page forensic audit of the so-called family card. Every unauthorized charge was categorized, totaled, and paired with the exact corporate policy it violated. It was a masterpiece of financial accountability, proving beyond any doubt that her parents and her sister had been committing systemic corporate fraud for years under the guise of family emergencies. She locked the document with a passcode and exported it as a pristine, undeniable PDF. Just as she finished, a new notification pinged in the corner of her monitor. An email marked high importance, from a prestigious, exceptionally expensive civil litigation firm in downtown Washington. The subject line was in bold, aggressive capitals, notice of intent of breach of verbal contract. She opened it. The message had been drafted by a senior managing partner named Hargrove, clearly retained by William on an emergency basis. The language was arrogant and threatening, mirroring her father's blustering tone perfectly. By issuing the emergency card, the lawyer claimed, Tessa had entered into a binding verbal contract to provide ongoing financial support to her family. Her sudden freezing of the assets, he argued, was a malicious, intentional breach that had caused severe emotional distress and irreparable reputational damage at a highly publicized social event. The final paragraph was a blunt ultimatum: unfreeze the card and wire $35,000 to the venue within 24 hours, or the firm would file a devastating civil lawsuit, alert her government contractors to her supposedly unstable financial practices, and ruin her professional reputation forever. Tessa stared at the blinking cursor, and a quiet laugh escaped her. She did not draft a frantic defense. She did not forward it to her own legal team. She simply opened her calendar and created a new event. She titled it, Vanguard Corporate Asset Audit and Compliance Review. She set it for exactly 1 hour from that moment. She added William, Barbara, Ashley, and the senior managing partner Hargrove to the mandatory attendee list. She attached the secure 50-page PDF, locked with a passcode she would only provide during the meeting. Then she hit send and watched the acceptances roll in. Within 5 minutes, every one of them had accepted. They thought they had backed her into a corner. They thought this video conference was her formal surrender. Exactly 1 hour later, Tessa clicked the link, and the screen filled with a grid of 4 squares. She sat in her quiet, well-lit office in her tailored navy suit, her expression neutral. In the next square, her parents sat together on their expensive cream sofa, William leaning back with a smug, victorious smile, Barbara stiff beside him, her chin tilted in superiority. In the third square, Ashley glared from a luxury honeymoon suite, the romantic setting ruined by the fury on her face. And in the final square sat the lawyer Hargrove, adjusting his silk tie in a mahogany-paneled office that reeked of billable hours. Hargrove cleared his throat and took the floor immediately. Miss Wilson, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, I am glad you have decided to handle this like an adult. If you are prepared to wire the funds and reinstate your family's access to the shared accounts, we can tear up the intent to sue and put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Your father has graciously agreed not to press charges for financial neglect, if you comply right now. Tessa did not respond to his threat. She did not even look at his square. She clicked the button to share her monitor, and a massive, heavily organized spreadsheet filled their screens. I am unmuting everyone's microphones, she said, her voice slicing through the static, but you are going to listen. The document you are looking at is a forensic financial audit of a Vanguard Defense Logistics corporate account. This is not a personal joint bank account. This is a highly restricted commercial credit line, issued to me in my capacity as Chief Executive Officer. William scoffed, leaning toward his camera. Cut the corporate nonsense, Tessa. You gave us that card. We had an agreement. You are legally obligated to honor it. Tessa provided the passcode in the chat, unlocking the PDF. Open the file, she instructed. She watched Hargrove's eyes dart to his second monitor. Then she scrolled to a block of transactions from 3 years earlier. Let us review the verbal agreement my father refers to, she continued, her tone clinical. 3 years ago, I deployed to a forward operating base. Before I left, I issued a corporate emergency card to William and Barbara, strictly for life or death medical situations. Instead, I returned to find this. She highlighted a single glaring line. Here is a $12,000 charge from a luxury travel agency in Paris. This was authorized the exact same week my logistics unit was taking indirect fire in a combat zone. You used my hazard pay, the money I earned wearing body armor and sleeping on a cot, to fund Ashley's 6-week trip to Europe, because she needed to find herself after dropping out of her master's. Ashley's face turned a violent shade of red. That was a family expense. She yelled. I was going through a severe mental health crisis. You have plenty of money. You are just being greedy and trying to humiliate me on my honeymoon. Tessa ignored her entirely and scrolled down. Here is an $8,000 charge 14 months ago for a Platinum Tier Country Club membership. Here are the monthly charges for imported orchids, cases of vintage champagne, and private tennis lessons. She looked directly into her camera, locking eyes with her parents. You have not been raising a golden child. You have been funding a parasite, using a soldier's blood money. How dare you speak to your sister that way? Barbara shrieked, hands flying to her face in mock horror. We are a family. Families support each other. You gave us access to that money, and we used it to maintain our standard of living. Tessa finally turned her attention to the fourth square. Hargrove was no longer looking at the camera. He was staring intently at the 50-page audit on his second monitor, and the arrogant smirk had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed expression of panic. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, addressing him directly, "I am sure a man with your background understands the strict federal regulations surrounding corporate assets. My parents retained your services under the false pretense that this was a domestic dispute over a shared personal account. They lied to you. They failed to mention that this card is the property of a government-contracted defense firm." Hargrove swallowed hard, his skin turning a sickly gray. He was putting the pieces together in real time, realizing that by sending a written demand to release funds from a frozen corporate account to pay a private caterer, he had inadvertently documented an attempt to extort a federal contractor. "If you pursue this lawsuit," Tessa continued calmly, "I will not simply defend myself in civil court. I will hand this 50-page forensic audit to federal authorities. I will report William, Barbara, and Ashley for systemic corporate fraud, wire fraud, and the unauthorized distribution of commercial assets. And since you just sent an email demanding I unfreeze those stolen funds to pay a private caterer, I will gladly hand over your written correspondence as evidence of your participation in an extortion attempt." The silence was absolute. Then the lawyer leaned toward his microphone, his voice shaking, completely stripped of its bravado. "Miss Wilson," he stammered, raising his hands defensively, "I was not informed of the corporate nature of this account. My clients explicitly stated this was a personal family trust. I had no knowledge that these funds were tied to a defense logistics firm." William's face twisted into a sneer. "What are you talking about, Hargrove? Do not let her intimidate you. She is bluffing. Sue her for every penny she has." The lawyer did not even glance at him. "Please be advised that as of this moment, I am formally withdrawing my representation of William, Barbara, and Ashley Wilson. I am advising my former clients that pursuing any legal action regarding this corporate account would result in catastrophic criminal liability. I will send an official termination of counsel notice immediately." And before William could utter another word, the lawyer's square went black. He had disconnected, running as fast as he legally could from the radioactive disaster. Ashley let out a piercing scream. "You ruined my life. You drove away our lawyer. Colin's family is going to find out we have no money. You are a monster, Tessa." Her square went black next as she slammed her laptop shut, leaving only her parents. The smug aura that had surrounded them at the start of the call was completely gone. Barbara looked terrified, her hands trembling in her lap. But William was incapable of backing down. His entire identity was built on control, and watching his expensive lawyer flee the battlefield shattered his fragile ego. He erupted into a violent, red-faced rage. "You ungrateful brat!" he roared, leaning so close his features distorted on camera. "You think you can treat your own flesh and blood like criminals? I am your father. I built this family. If you do not wire that $35,000 right this second, you are dead to me." Tessa sat perfectly still, letting his fury wash over her without leaving a mark. "I am officially cutting you out of the inheritance," William screamed, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "You will not see a single dime of the family money. And you can forget about the lake house. I am evicting you. You are permanently banned from setting foot on that property ever again. Consider yourself officially evicted." He sat back, breathing heavily, clearly believing he had just played an unbeatable trump card, that the threat of losing the sacred family property would force her to beg. Tessa looked at the man who had blocked her from her sister's wedding because her uniform was not good enough for his wealthy friends. She looked at the man who had stolen her combat pay to fund his country club life. And a cold, sharp smile formed on her lips. "Oh, Dad," she said, her voice soft but entirely lethal. "We really need to talk about the house." William scoffed, the harsh sound vibrating through the speakers. He leaned back aggressively against the cream sofa, his face flushed with high blood pressure and unearned arrogance. "There is nothing to talk about," he spat, his voice booming. "The lake house has been the crown jewel of the Wilson Family Trust since before you were even born. It is a place of refinement, an estate designed for the family to gather, to host galas, to entertain. You have always treated that sacred property like a glorified military barracks." Barbara nodded vigorously beside him, her tear-stained face tightening into a mask of vindictive agreement now that the lawyer had fled. "Your father is exactly right," she added. "You track mud onto the imported hardwood with those heavy combat boots. You isolate yourself in the master suite. We needed that house for Ashley. We needed the grounds for her bridal showers and her engagement parties, but you refused to participate in polite society. You are an embarrassment to the family legacy." William pointed a thick finger at his webcam. "I am the sole executor of the Wilson Family Trust," he declared. "I control the assets. I decide who benefits from our wealth and who gets cast out into the cold. And as of right now, your name is permanently struck from the ledger. I am calling a private security firm tomorrow morning. I am sending a locksmith up to the lake house to change every deadbolt. They are going to pack your cheap army gear into garbage bags and leave it on the curb." He leaned closer, a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his face. "I am taking the deed, and I am giving the keys to Ashley and Colin as a wedding present. Consider yourself officially evicted." Tessa did not interrupt his tirade. She did not raise her voice, and she certainly did not panic. She simply sat back, steepled her fingers, and let him completely exhaust himself. She watched his chest heave with the effort of yelling. She watched Barbara cling to his arm, entirely reliant on his illusions of grandeur. They were desperately clinging to a version of reality that had expired long ago. An identity built on the illusion of limitless, untouchable wealth, completely ignoring the cold mathematical reality of how that wealth actually worked. When William finally ran out of breath, panting heavily into the microphone, a thick silence fell over the call. Tessa did not break eye contact with the camera. She slowly rested her hand on her mouse. "Are you quite finished?" she asked, her voice dangerously even. "I am finished when I say I am finished," William snapped, though his voice had lost its volume. "You have an ultimatum, Tessa. Pay the caterer or lose the lake house." She moved her mouse and clicked. The 50-page audit vanished from their shared screen, replaced by a stark, brightly lit government portal. "Let us examine the actual leverage you hold, Dad," she said. She typed an address with deliberate rhythmic keystrokes. "You seem to firmly believe you hold the ultimate trump card. You believe that because you were born into money, because you inherited the title of executor, you have absolute authority over my life, my career, and my housing." The website loaded instantly, the official public archive of county real estate records, the county seal displayed proudly in the corner. "What is this?" Barbara asked, squinting at her monitor. "This is public record, Mom," Tessa explained, her tone resembling a professor lecturing a slow class. "This is the legally binding digital ledger of property ownership for the entire county. Anyone with an internet connection can access it. And I am accessing it right now to show you exactly how misplaced your arrogance truly is." She typed in the exact address of the sprawling multimillion-dollar lake house, the estate with the private boat dock, the wraparound cedar porches, the stone fireplaces, the panoramic views of the water. The sacred property William claimed to control with an iron fist. She hit enter, and the database displayed a comprehensive list of documents tied to the address. William leaned forward, his brow furrowing. I do not care about your little computer tricks, he growled. The house belongs to the Wilson Family Trust. It has been secured in the trust since 1985. I hold the original paperwork in my safe downstairs. You hold outdated, worthless paperwork, Tessa corrected him sharply. She clicked a PDF titled Transfer of Deed and Ownership, and an official government stamped document filled the screen. You see, Dad, while you were busy playing golf, buying imported champagne, and bragging about your real estate portfolio, you completely neglected the actual management of your finances. A family trust requires capital to function. It requires responsible administration. But you treated it like a casino. 5 years ago, you leveraged the lake house to secure a massive commercial loan. You desperately needed liquid cash to cover your failing, poorly researched stock investments. But you never bothered to pay the loan back. She highlighted the top section of the document, detailing a massive bank foreclosure. You ignored the warnings, she continued, her voice steady and unrelenting. You threw the certified letters in the trash because you honestly believed you were untouchable. You thought a bank would never actually repossess a historic property from a man of your social standing. So 2 years ago, while I was stationed overseas, managing billions of dollars in military logistics and coordinating supply drops in hostile territory, the bank initiated a quiet foreclosure on your sacred family property. They seized the estate to cover your defaulted debts. They legally stripped the trust of its assets. William's face drained of color. The arrogant flush vanished, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words that would not come. Barbara covered her mouth with both trembling hands, horror washing over her made-up face. The bank put the lake house up for private auction, Tessa explained, highlighting the next section. It was going to be sold to a ruthless commercial developer. Their file blueprints show they plan to bulldoze the entire historic property, tear down the cedar porches and build a complex of luxury condominiums. You were about to lose the crown jewel of the Wilson family, and you did not even know it was happening, because you were too busy planning Ashley's absurdly expensive engagement party. She scrolled to the bottom of the document, bringing the final transfer of ownership and the buyer's name into full view. I received an automated alert from a colleague in commercial real estate, she said, letting the reality sink in. I saw the house was going to auction, so I stepped in. I did not use family money. The family money was completely gone. I used my own personal capital. I used the massive profits from my supposedly pathetic warehouse job. I established a blind holding company to shield the transaction from the press. I wired the funds directly to the bank's liquidation department. I paid the back taxes you ignored for 5 years. I paid the contractor liens you refused to settle because you thought manual laborers were beneath your attention. I purchased the property from the bank in cash, completely clearing the debt and stopping the demolition tractors from rolling onto the lawn. She pointed her cursor at the bold text on the screen. The registered owner of the property was not the Wilson Family Trust. It was Vanguard Defense Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary of her logistics firm. I bought the house, Dad, she stated, her voice echoing coldly. I own the estate. I own the land. I own the private boat dock. I own the cedar porches. I own every single blade of grass on that property. William stared at the screen, his eyes wide, unblinking, terrified. The reality of his ruin was staring back at him. He could not bully his way out of a legally binding county deed. He could not threaten a government database. The entire illusion of his power was irreparably shattered. Tessa leaned toward the camera, ensuring he could see the absolute lack of mercy in her eyes. Dad, she said softly, delivering the final blow. The family trust went bankrupt 2 years ago. You don't own anything. William let out a harsh, humorless bark of laughter, leaning forward until his face filled the square. You are completely delusional, he sputtered. Though his voice had lost its authority, The family trust is an ironclad institution. I have wealth managers. I have an accountant I play golf with every weekend. They would have notified me if there was a problem. You are fabricating documents to scare us, because you know you are legally cornered. Tessa did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She pulled up a detailed commercial banking ledger and positioned it right next to the forensic audit. You do not have wealth managers, Dad, she corrected him. You have yes-men who happily took your retainer fees while watching you steer the family finances off a cliff. 4 years ago, the trust began hemorrhaging cash. You were desperate to maintain the illusion of being a high society patriarch. You needed liquid capital to fund Ashley's absurd lifestyle. Her designer cars, her tuition at schools she rarely attended, the catered parties you threw to impress your associates. But you had zero income-generating assets left. Your stock portfolio was a disaster. So you did what every desperate man obsessed with appearances does. You leveraged your physical assets. You secretly took out a series of high-interest commercial loans against the Wilson Family Trust, using the sacred properties as collateral. You thought you could borrow against the equity indefinitely. But commercial loans require actual repayment, Dad. They require structured monthly capital that you simply did not have. William swallowed hard, his face going from flushed red to sickly gray. He glanced nervously at Barbara, who was staring at the screen in unblinking horror. When the money ran out, you ignored the problem, Tessa said, driving the final nail in. You shredded the certified bank letters. You ignored the calls from the lending department. You believed your last name and your country club membership made you immune to the consequences of default. But institutional lenders do not care about your social standing. They care about their balance sheets. 2 years ago, the bank classified your unpaid loans as toxic debt. They did not bother sending the sheriff. They chose a faster, cleaner strategy. They bundled your defaulted loans and auctioned the toxic debt on the private market to the highest corporate bidder. They completely circumvented you. She let the silence stretch. My logistics firm is not just a warehouse, Dad. Vanguard Defense Logistics is a global operation, and it has an aggressive real estate subsidiary that constantly monitors the private market for bundled debt. We acquire properties for supply chain infrastructure and corporate housing. 2 years ago, an analyst flagged a portfolio of 4 foreclosed properties in Virginia. I reviewed the file personally. I recognized the addresses immediately. She switched the screen to the final indisputable proof, the official county deed. I authorized the acquisition. I used my own corporate capital to buy your bad debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I paid off the liens you ignored. I settled the back taxes you refused to pay. I bought the physical deed out from under the collapsed family trust. I am the sole registered legal owner of the estate. William was paralyzed, his eyes darting across the deed, searching desperately for a loophole, a typo, a clerical error that would save him. There was nothing. The documentation was pristine. You do not live in your lake house, Dad, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. You live in my portfolio. You are a guest on my property. And as of this exact moment, your visitation privileges are permanently revoked. Barbara let out a sharp, choked gasp. Until that second, she had been sitting frozen, her brain struggling to comprehend the scale of the ruin. But something in Tessa's words triggered a new and far more terrifying realization. She turned slowly to face William, her hands shaking so violently that her diamond rings rattled against each other. William, she whispered, her voice cracking. William, look at me. The trust holds the lake house. William refused to look at her, his jaw locked tight. Barbara grabbed his shoulder, her manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. William, tell me right now, she demanded, her voice rising in panic. Not just put the vacation home on the line. He had used their primary residence. the massive pillared suburban estate they were sitting in at that very moment as collateral. "Oh my God," Barbara breathed, shrinking back into the sofa as if the furniture itself had become toxic. "You lost this house too. You lost the primary estate. We do not own the roof over our heads. We are tenants." "That is correct, Mom," Tessa said, maintaining her cold professional distance. "The bank bundled the entire trust. My real estate subsidiary acquired the complete portfolio. You have been living in a house owned by my company for the last 2 years. I allowed you to stay out of a misplaced sense of family loyalty. I quietly paid the property taxes and the maintenance fees while you paraded around acting like royalty. But since you made it explicitly clear on Saturday night that I am not family, I no longer have any obligation to provide you with free corporate housing. I will be serving you with a formal 30-day notice of eviction by the end of the week. You can pack your designer clothes and find a new place to live." Barbara let out a loud, genuine sob, burying her face in her hands. The destruction of her social empire was absolute. She was about to be evicted from her own showcase home by the daughter she had turned away at the door. Suddenly, the third square flared back to life. Ashley had reconnected. She had clearly been listening off camera, waiting to see if William could bully Tessa into submission. When she realized the family fortune was entirely fiction, and that her sister held the deeds to their entire existence, her perfectly curated bridal persona fractured completely. She leaned into her camera, her face streaked with ruined mascara, looking unhinged. "You are bluffing," she screamed. "You are making all of this up to ruin my honeymoon because you are a sick, twisted person. You do not own anything. The documents are right there on the screen," Ashley, Tessa replied, feeling nothing but pity. "The county clerk validated them. The bank authorized the transfer. Your fairy tale is over. The money is gone." Ashley slammed her hands on her desk. "Fine," she yelled, her eyes wild and desperate. "Fine. Even if you bought the debt, it does not matter. You think you have won, Tessa, but you have no idea who you are dealing with. You forgot about Colin." She let out a frantic, breathless laugh, clinging to her last perceived lifeline. "Colin's family is old money. His father sits on the board of 3 different international banks. They have actual limitless wealth, not some fake logistics company. They protect real family. When I tell Colin what you are trying to do to us, his father will step in. He will buy the debt right out from under you. He will hire a team of ruthless corporate litigators, and they will bury your pathetic little warehouse company in injunctions and lawsuits until you are forced into bankruptcy. They will ruin you, Tessa, and I am going to sit back and watch them do it." Ashley leaned closer, her highlighted hair falling wildly around her face, her voice shrill with the desperate entitlement of someone who had never worked a hard day in her life. "Colin's parents adore me. They love my pedigree. They appreciate the refinement I bring to their social circle, something a rigid, uncultured army grunt like you could never understand. You spent your 20s sleeping in the dirt and barking orders at truck drivers. I spent mine building the exact social network required to obliterate you. I am organizing a formal dinner with Colin's parents this Saturday at the most exclusive private club in the city. I am going to sit down over a bottle of vintage Bordeaux and tell my new father-in-law exactly what kind of vindictive, jealous monster you really are. I am going to explain how you manipulated a bank error to steal our family home, and then I am going to ask him for a loan, and he will write a check for the entire value of that property without blinking. We are going to buy that toxic debt directly from your warehouse company, rip the deed out of your hands, and then my husband's lawyers will serve you with a proper eviction notice. And we will not stop there. I am going to sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Colin's father plays golf with senators. His mother chairs international charity galas. They do not tolerate extortion from bitter, estranged siblings. They will drag you through years of litigation until your firm bleeds dry. You think you are a brilliant tactician, but you just brought a spreadsheet to a billionaire's fight. Tessa did not raise her voice to match the hysteria. She did not defend her service or her business. She let her sister finish the entire frantic monologue. She let the silence hang for 5 long seconds, watching the frantic energy pulse through Ashley's shoulders. And then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, mechanical expression of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a steel trap. "That sounds like a wonderful plan, Ashley," she said, her voice perfectly smooth and undeniably lethal. "A formal dinner with your wealthy new in-laws is exactly what this situation requires. Transparency is so important when 2 prominent families merge. I would hate for Colin's parents to invest their considerable capital without performing proper due diligence. So I am going to make this very easy for you." She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the mahogany desk, locking her eyes onto the camera. "I want you to text me the exact address of this private club. I want the reservation time and the table number. You do not need to worry about asking Colin's father for a loan, because I am going to attend that dinner. I am going to walk right up to your table, and I am going to bring the original physical property deeds. I will bring the bank foreclosure notices. I will bring the itemized receipts showing exactly how your lavish rehearsal dinner was funded by defrauding a federal contractor. And just so Colin's father fully understands the integrity of the family his son just married into, I will bring the 50-page forensic audit detailing how you funded your honeymoon and your designer clothes. We can lay it all out on the white tablecloth, right next to the vintage Bordeaux. I will gladly let Colin's mother review the fraudulent invoices for your bridal gown." Ashley's triumphant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. She opened her mouth to scream another insult, but Tessa did not give her the chance. She reached out and clicked the red button at the bottom of her screen. The conference ended, cutting off her sister's voice and plunging the office into total silence. The digital ambush was complete. Now it was time to prepare the physical ammunition. Tessa did not waste a single second celebrating the victory. She transitioned instantly into execution mode. She opened her secure encrypted drive and sent a command to her high-speed office printer, which immediately hummed to life, turning out thick, crisp pages of undeniable financial evidence. She walked over to her heavy steel filing cabinet. She was not going to a formal dinner armed with empty verbal threats. She operated on documented reality. She pulled out a heavy black leather binder. Inside lay the original watermarked property deeds for the lake house, legally transferred and recorded to her real estate subsidiary. She placed them carefully in the center of her desk. Next came the foreclosure notices, complete with the bank's certified seals and the grim timeline of her father's negligence. But the deeds and the credit card audit were only the beginning. William had claimed his trust was an ironclad institution. He had claimed the commercial loans were standard business practice. That was the comforting lie he told himself to sleep at night. The truth was far more sinister, and Tessa had the exact paperwork to prove it. She reached deep into the back of the cabinet and extracted a separate, thick red folder. This was the precise reason her father's high-priced lawyer had fled the video call in sweating terror. When she purchased the bad debt from the commercial lender, her firm had inherently acquired all the original loan application files. She had ordered her internal compliance team to review every single page. And what they found went far beyond bad investments or careless spending. She opened the red folder and spread the heavily watermarked documents across her desk. They were the original commercial loan applications William had submitted to the bank 5 years ago. Next to them, she placed the actual historical tax returns for the Wilson Family Trust. The numbers did not match. They were not even in the same stratosphere. To secure the massive lines of credit needed to maintain his country club facade, William had systematically inflated the trust's assets. He had fabricated income streams that simply did not exist. He had forged the signatures of non-existent board members to push the paperwork through processing. He had submitted entirely fraudulent tax documents to a federally insured financial institution. He had committed textbook, undeniable wire fraud and bank fraud. He had not just bankrupted the family trust. He had committed major federal felonies, just to keep Ashley dressed in designer labels and Barbara stocked with imported champagne. Tessa took a red felt pen and methodically circled the forged signatures. She highlighted the fabricated asset columns in bright yellow. She cross-referenced every fraudulent loan application with the corresponding date of a major family purchase. When William bought the imported luxury SUV for her mother, he had filed a fake quarterly earnings report with the bank that same week. When Ashley demanded a $60,000 engagement ring, William had forged the signature of a non-existent trust guarantor to secure a secondary line of credit. It was a masterclass in pathetic, desperate criminality. She printed the digital metadata. She printed the email timestamps. She left absolutely zero room for interpretation, negotiation, or denial. She attached the fraudulent applications to the credit card audit, building a comprehensive chronological timeline of generational theft, and placed everything into a reinforced tactical briefcase, organized with military precision using color-coded index tabs. If Ashley truly wanted to drag her billionaire in-laws into the crossfire, Tessa was going to hand them a fully documented federal indictment right alongside their dessert menus. The afternoon faded into evening, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across her office floor. She sat perfectly still at her desk, reviewing the timeline over and over, anticipating every possible counterattack Colin's family lawyers might deploy. She was ready for a brutal, drawn-out legal war. She was ready to destroy the illusion of the Wilson family legacy in open court if they dared to challenge her ownership. Then a soft chime broke the silence. She glanced at her secondary monitor. It was not an email from her logistics team. It was not a frantic text from a panicking relative. It was a private message on her professional networking profile, a platform she rarely used for direct communication, keeping it strictly for corporate networking and vendor acquisition. She frowned and clicked the notification open. The sender's name appeared in bold black letters: Colin Sterling. Her sister's new husband, the Golden Boy. The heir to the banking fortune Ashley had just sworn would unleash total legal hellfire to protect her honor. His profile picture showed a polished man in a bespoke suit, standing confidently in front of a sleek corporate banking logo. He was the kind of man meticulously trained to spot a bad investment from a mile away, the kind of man whose entire family fortune was built on ruthless risk assessment. Tessa opened the message, fully expecting a barrage of aggressive legal threats, a demand for surrender, or a pompous declaration of his family's untouchable resources. Instead, the message contained only two short, urgent sentences. "We need to talk before this dinner on Saturday," it read. "I found the audit you emailed to the lawyer." She did not reply with a lengthy explanation. She simply typed an address and a time. It was a small, independent coffee roaster on a quiet street in Georgetown, far removed from the polished banking hubs and exclusive lounges where his family usually operated. Neutral territory. She arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth with her back to the wall, giving her a clear view of the entrance. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her posture relaxed but completely alert, the reinforced tactical briefcase resting on the table in front of her. Colin Sterling walked through the glass door exactly on time. She recognized him immediately from the wedding photos Ashley had plastered across social media. But the man walking toward her table bore very little resemblance to the glowing, triumphant groom in those pictures. The heir to an international banking fortune was supposed to radiate effortless confidence. Instead, Colin looked like a man who had not slept in days. His navy suit was slightly rumpled, the knot of his silk tie pulled loose. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes and a pale, sickly pallor to his skin. He spotted her in the corner, hesitated for a fraction of a second, and crossed the room. He slid into the booth across from her, moving with a rigid, mechanical stiffness. He did not offer to shake her hand. He simply stared at her face, her tailored clothes, her steady, unwavering expression. "You do not look like an addict," Colin said. His voice was hoarse, stripped entirely of the polished charm she had expected. Tessa did not react to the bizarre statement. She maintained steady eye contact and waited for him to explain. "The lawyer sent an automated termination of counsel notice to every email address associated with your family's legal file," Colin continued, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them on the table. "My email was on that list because I was the one paying his retainer." He attached a heavily redacted file to his withdrawal notice, citing a massive conflict of interest and potential criminal exposure. "I opened the file. I read the audit. I read the spreadsheet detailing a corporate credit card." He stopped, taking a jagged breath, and glanced around the quiet coffee shop as if making sure no one was listening before leaning closer. "Ashley told me you were in a lockdown rehabilitation center," he whispered, the devastation cracking through his voice. "She told my parents you had been struggling with severe, uncontrollable substance abuse for years. She said your military service had broken you, that you were completely unstable, that you had been violently estranged from the family because you kept stealing from your father to fund your addiction. That is the story she told my entire family at the rehearsal dinner. When my mother asked why you were not standing at the altar with her, Ashley cried in my mother's arms. She played the role of the tragic, heartbroken, supportive sister so perfectly." Tessa sat perfectly still. The sheer magnitude of Ashley's lying was breathtaking. She had not simply hidden her sister's existence. She had actively weaponized her military service and assassinated her character to extract sympathy from her wealthy new in-laws. "But the lie goes so much deeper than just an excuse for your absence," Colin said, his eyes dropping to the table. "A month before the wedding, Ashley came to my parents in absolute hysterics. She claimed your treatment facility was threatening to throw you out onto the street. She said William's assets were temporarily tied up in a complex trust negotiation, and he could not liquidate the funds in time. She told my father that if you were discharged from that facility, you would be dead within a week. She begged him for a bridge loan." He looked back up at her, his expression twisting with a sickening realization. "My father does not negotiate with human lives. He wrote a check for $35,000 that exact same day. He registered it as a private charitable donation to your supposed medical facility to save your life. Ashley took that check. And then I read your audit. I read the exact dollar amounts." Tessa did not offer him a sympathetic smile. She did not offer platitudes. She simply unclasped the heavy steel locks on her tactical briefcase, flipped the lid open, and extracted the thick color-coded file. "You are a banker, Colin," she said, her voice clinical and precise. "You possess the financial literacy to understand exactly what you are about to look at. I am not going to ask you to take my word against your wife's tears. I am going to show you the undeniable reality of the family you just married into." She slid a stack of documents across the table. "These are my federal service records," she stated, placing them down first. "As you can clearly read, during the exact time frame Ashley claimed I was violently stealing from my father to fund a fictional addiction, I was actively deployed in a hostile combat zone, managing forward operating logistics. I was not in a rehabilitation center. I was in body armor." She placed the corresponding bank statements next to the records. "This is the direct deposit history for my combat hazard pay. And right next to it is the ledger for the Vanguard Corporate Emergency Card, a card strictly governed by federal contracting regulations." She watched Colin's eyes scan the pages. He was a man raised in high finance. He processed the data instantly. She saw the exact moment his brain connected the dates on her deployment records to the dates of the massive charges on the corporate card. He saw the $12,000 Parisian vacation. He saw the country club memberships, the imported orchids, the cases of vintage champagne. He was looking at a documented timeline of generational theft. "Now let us examine the charity of your father," Tessa said softly. She pulled out a single highlighted invoice and placed it directly in front of him. The billing statement from the exclusive country club where he had recently celebrated his wedding reception. "Ashley told your parents she needed $35,000 for a medical facility," she said, pointing to the final total on the catering invoice. "Here is the final bill for your wedding venue. The total is exactly $35,000. William promised to pay for the wedding to maintain his facade of wealth in front of your family. But William is completely bankrupt." When the venue threatened to cancel the reception over non-payment, Ashley panicked. "She fabricated a horrific, degrading lie about my mental health to extort your parents into covering her father's bounce checks. She used your family's genuine compassion to pay for her catering." Colin stared at the invoice, his skin turning ashen. The reality of the grift was absolute. His wife had not just lied to him. She had actively, maliciously defrauded his family to maintain an illusion. "But I am not finished," Tessa said, her tone hardening. "I am going to show you exactly why William is bankrupt, because it directly impacts your family's banking empire." She pulled out the red folder, the original commercial loan applications and the historical tax returns, and spread them across the small table. "Your father sits on the board of international banks," she said, watching his eyes drop to the watermarked forms. "So I know you understand the severe federal implications of bank fraud. To secure the commercial loans required to fund Ashley's lifestyle, William systematically falsified the trust's asset column. He fabricated income streams. He forged the signatures of non-existent guarantors. He submitted entirely fraudulent tax documents to a federally insured institution." She pointed to the highlighted discrepancies, drawing clear lines between the fake tax returns and the approved loans. When the money ran out, William defaulted. The bank quietly foreclosed on the trust. They bundled the toxic debt, including the deed to the lake house and the deed to the primary estate, and auctioned it off on the private market. She slid the final document across the table. The official county deed. "My logistics firm purchased that debt. I own the lake house. I own the primary estate. Your new wife and her parents are currently living in my corporate portfolio as non-paying tenants. And Ashley is planning to host a formal dinner with your parents this Saturday, where she intends to ask your father for a massive loan to buy this debt from me, claiming I stole the property through a bank error. She intends to use your family's resources to fight a legal war against a federal contractor, dragging your family's pristine reputation into a radioactive federal fraud investigation." Colin sat perfectly still. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stared at the documents spread across the table. He was looking at the complete destruction of his marriage. He was looking at a sociopathic grift that had ensnared his parents. He was looking at a family of arrogant, entitled criminals who had viewed his banking fortune as nothing more than a permanent cash machine. The silence in the coffee shop felt thick and suffocating, the faint hiss of the espresso machine belonging to an entirely different universe. Slowly, deliberately, Colin reached out. He gathered the deployment records, the credit card audit, the catering invoice, the forged loan applications, and the property deeds. He stacked them together with precise, methodical movements, tapping the edges against the table, perfectly aligning the corners, his banking instincts taking over in the face of total emotional devastation. He placed the thick stack in the center of the table and closed the file cover. When he finally looked up, The confusion and exhaustion were gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, terrifying, absolute fury. It was the look of a man who possessed immense generational power, and had just realized he had been played for a fool. Colin rested his hand flat on top of the file. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, lethal certainty of a man preparing to initiate total warfare. "Can I bring this file to the family dinner on Saturday?" he asked. Tessa looked at the shattered banker, recognizing the exact moment a predator decides to strike. She gave him a single, slow nod. "I was counting on it," she said. "I was counting on it." Saturday evening descended on the city with a cold, biting wind, but inside the mahogany-paneled walls of the Capitol Grill, the atmosphere was insulated entirely by money. The private dining room Tessa approached was a masterpiece of architectural exclusivity. 3 solid, soundproof walls of dark wood, and a 4th wall made entirely of thick tempered glass that looked out over the main dining floor. It allowed the occupants to be seen by the public while remaining completely untouchable, the exact kind of performative display her father craved. She stood in the shadowed hallway just outside the glass, positioned in a blind spot, and watched the scene unfold with clinical detachment. William sat at the head of the long oak table, wearing a bespoke suit he no longer owned the rights to, holding a crystal glass of Cabernet. He was leaning toward Arthur Sterling, Colin's father, a man whose quiet, understated posture radiated actual generational wealth. Barbara sat beside Eleanor Sterling, nodding sympathetically. And Ashley held court at the center of the table. Even through the thick glass, the pantomime was painfully obvious. Ashley was dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a linen napkin, playing the exhausted, heartbroken sister. She reached out and placed her hand over Eleanor's, her face a mask of tragic concern. She was setting the hook, painting the picture of her sister's fabricated demise, weaving the elaborate lie about the addiction and the agonizing toll it was taking on the family's finances. William smoothly took the baton from his weeping daughter. Tessa watched him set his wine glass down with a heavy, dramatic sigh, press his hands together, and adopt the solemn, burdened expression of a patriarch making a terrible sacrifice. He was feeding Arthur Sterling the rehearsed script, explaining how the family trust was temporarily frozen, how the liquid assets were tied up in emergency medical trusts for a fictional rehabilitation, how he just needed a temporary multimillion-dollar bridge loan to secure a real estate asset that had fallen into foreclosure due to a clerical error. They were orchestrating a high society shakedown, using a stolen identity as the emotional leverage to pry open the Sterling family vault. And Colin sat silently at the opposite end of the table, staring down at his untouched steak, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered beneath his skin. He did not look at his wife. He simply waited. Tessa reached down and smoothed the fabric of her jacket. She was not wearing her tailored corporate suit tonight. She was wearing her formal, pristine military dress uniform. Every brass button was polished to a mirror shine. The fabric was immaculately pressed, holding sharp, unforgiving creases. The rack of commendations and service medals resting over her left breast pocket gleamed under the amber restaurant lighting. She wore the uniform of a commanding officer in the United States military, projecting absolute, undeniable authority. She was the living, breathing antithesis of the twitching, unstable addict Ashley had just described. She stepped out of the shadows, grasped the heavy brass handles of the double doors, and pushed them open. The doors swung inward with a smooth, heavy glide. She stepped across the threshold and let them close behind her with a soft, final click that sealed the room. The reaction was instantaneous and entirely chaotic. Ashley was mid-sentence, a perfectly practiced tear rolling down her cheek as she spoke to her mother-in-law. Her eyes flicked toward the door, registered her sister's presence, and the words died in her throat. She froze, her hand hovering in the air, holding the linen napkin, her face draining of all blood. She looked as though she had just watched a ghost manifest over her dinner plate. William abruptly stopped talking, his head snapping toward the entrance. The color vanished from his flushed cheeks, replaced by a sickening chalky pallor. The confident, wealthy patriarch completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered fraud. Arthur and Eleanor Sterling looked up, their expressions shifting from polite engagement to total bewilderment. They looked at the crisp uniform. They looked at the sober, disciplined posture. They looked at the medals representing years of dedicated overseas combat logistics. Their minds clearly struggled to reconcile the commanding officer standing before them with the pathetic, drug-addicted degenerate Ashley had just spent 40 minutes describing in vivid detail. "Tessa," Arthur Sterling said, his voice thick with confusion. "Ashley just told us you were in a secure medical facility upstate." Tessa did not get the chance to answer him. The overwhelming panic of the moment finally shattered Barbara's fragile composure. The illusion was collapsing in front of her wealthy peers, and her brain defaulted to pure, unhinged hysterics. Barbara pushed her chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed against the hardwood. She lunged to her feet, waving her arms frantically toward the glass wall, desperately trying to flag down the maitre d'. "Security," she hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper meant to preserve some semblance of decorum while executing total panic. "Somebody get security in here right now. She is not supposed to be here. She is having an episode." She turned her frantic, wide eyes toward Eleanor Sterling. "I am so sorry, Eleanor," she babbled, stepping physically between Tessa and the table as if her daughter were carrying a live grenade. "This is exactly what we were talking about. She is completely unstable. She breaks out of her treatment centers and steals military uniforms to impersonate officers. It is a severe psychological delusion. She is dangerous. We need to have her removed before she becomes violent." Barbara took a step toward her, hands raised, trying to herd her back out the door. "You need to leave, Tessa," she gritted through her teeth, her eyes wide with desperate rage. "Get out of here right now, before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Tessa did not take a single step backward. She stood her ground, her hands clasped loosely behind her back in a standard military parade rest, watching her mother unravel. She let her spin her frantic, easily disprovable lies directly in front of the people she was trying to rob. Then a chair scraped loudly against the floorboards at the far end of the table. Colin stood up. He did not look like the compliant, supportive husband who had sat silently through the rehearsal dinner. He looked like a man who had spent the last 48 hours reviewing a forensic audit of his wife's pathological deception. He looked completely, utterly lethal. "Sit down, Barbara," Colin commanded. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like the crack of a whip, carrying the unquestionable authority of the Sterling family empire. It was an order, not a request. Barbara froze in her tracks, her mouth hanging open, stunned by the aggressive tone of her normally polite son-in-law. "But Colin," she stammered, her hands fluttering in the air, "she is having a psychotic break. We need to protect the family." "I said, sit down," Colin repeated, his eyes locking onto hers with a cold, terrifying intensity. "She is not having a psychotic break. She is not dangerous. And she is certainly not trespassing." He stepped away from his chair and walked slowly down the length of the long oak table, moving past his bewildered parents, past his sweating, paralyzed father-in-law, and past his trembling, hyperventilating wife. He stopped right next to Tessa and turned to face his in-laws with a look of absolute disgust. "She is my guest," Colin stated, his voice echoing cleanly off the glass walls. "I invited her here tonight." Arthur Sterling frowned, looking from his son to the immaculate uniform. "Colin, what is going on here?" he asked, his sharp banking instincts clearly sensing the massive discrepancy. "Ashley just spent half the evening detailing Tessa's severe medical crisis. Why is your guest wearing a perfectly tailored dress uniform? Because everything you have been told tonight, Colin answered, his eyes fixed on his wife, and everything you have been told since the moment I introduced Ashley into our family, is a complete and total fabrication. Ashley let out a small, strangled whimper. She shrank back into her leather chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. The blood had entirely left her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. She realized with absolute crushing certainty that the secret coffee shop meeting had taken place. She realized the trap had sprung and the steel jaws were snapping shut around her entire life. Colin did not offer her a shred of mercy. He reached down and unclasped the brass locks of the heavy leather briefcase resting beside his chair. My father-in-law did not experience a minor cash flow disruption, Colin said, addressing his parents while glaring at William. He did not suffer a clerical error at the bank. He systematically defrauded commercial lenders by filing fabricated tax returns and inflating the assets of a bankrupt family trust to fund his country club lifestyle. He defaulted on every single loan he took out, resulting in the bank foreclosing on their vacation property and the primary residence they are currently living in. Colin reached into the briefcase and pulled out the thick file, the color-coded tabs sticking out sharply from the sides. And my wife did not ask you for a $35,000 bridge loan to save her sister from a medical discharge. Her sister is a decorated military logistics officer who spent the last 2 years running supply chains in active combat zones. Ashley asked you for that money because her father's checks bounced, and she needed your charity to pay the catering bill for our wedding reception. Colin lifted the 50-page forensic audit high into the air. He held it there for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of the documentation hang over the room. Then, with a swift, violent motion, he dropped the massive file directly onto the center of the dining table. It hit the solid oak with a deafening thud that rattled the fine china and sent red wine splashing violently against the sides of the crystal glasses. The echo faded, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence. Drops of spilled Cabernet sank into the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Mother, father, Colin said, his voice carrying a chilling, absolute calm that commanded total attention. I apologize for the abrupt disruption to our evening. I know we came here to discuss a financial partnership between our families. But before you write another check, you need to know exactly who you are sitting across from. You need to understand the reality of the people I foolishly married into. Eleanor Sterling stared at the thick color-coded audit resting next to her wine glass. She looked from the folder up to her son, then shifted her gaze to Tessa, taking in the sharp-pressed lines of the military uniform and the polished brass medals. The cognitive dissonance was clearly overwhelming her. Colin, what is this? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Ashley just spent the last 40 minutes telling us her sister was undergoing emergency medical treatment, locked in a secure facility battling a life-threatening addiction. She said she broke into your house and stole heirlooms to fund her habit. That is exactly what Ashley told me, Colin replied, turning his cold gaze down toward his wife. That is the story she spun for our entire family at the rehearsal dinner, to explain why her only sibling was absent from the wedding. It was a tragic, compelling narrative designed to extract maximum sympathy. But it was a complete, calculated lie. Colin tapped his index finger sharply against the cover of the audit. A month before the wedding, Ashley came to you in absolute hysterics. He continued, addressing his father. She claimed that Tessa's treatment facility was threatening to discharge her onto the street due to a lapse in insurance. She claimed William's assets were temporarily tied up in a trust negotiation, and that they needed immediate liquid capital to save her sister's life. You wrote a check for $35,000 that very afternoon. You registered it as a private charitable donation, because you are a good, honorable man who wanted to help your future daughter-in-law save her family. Arthur Sterling sat perfectly rigid, his keen analytical eyes locked onto his son. "And where did that money actually go?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping an octave. Colin did not hesitate. He opened the file and slid a highlighted, itemized invoice across the polished oak to his father. "It went to the country club," Colin stated flatly. "The $35,000 you donated to save an imaginary addict was exactly the amount required to cover the final catering bill for our wedding reception. William is completely bankrupt." His checks bounced. The venue threatened to cancel the reception. So Ashley fabricated a horrific, degrading lie about her sister's mental health to extort you into paying for her floral arrangements and her champagne tower. Ashley let out a sharp, breathless gasp, pressing both hands over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Colin and his parents. Barbara shrank back into her seat, looking as though she might physically vomit. The pure sociopathy of the grift hung in the air, sickening and undeniable. "But the fraud goes far beyond a single stolen check," Colin said, his voice rising with controlled, righteous fury. He turned the pages, exposing the highlighted bank statements and the copies of the forged loan applications. "The Wilsons did not just scam us. They have been engaged in systematic generational theft for the better part of a decade." William committed textbook wire fraud. He forged signatures to secure commercial loans against a trust he had already drained. He leveraged the family estate to buy designer cars and luxury vacations, and then he let the bank foreclose on the entire portfolio. Colin pointed directly at Tessa, his hand steady. "Tessa did not steal from them," he declared to the room. "They stole from her. While Ashley was telling you that her sister was a dangerous, unstable degenerate, Tessa was actively deployed in a hostile combat zone. She is a decorated logistics officer, and while she was downrange, wearing body armor and managing federal supply chains, William and Ashley were intercepting her combat hazard pay. They used her military direct deposits to fund their country club memberships. They drained her accounts to pay for Ashley's designer handbags." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The polite, high society confusion vanished, replaced by an intense, volatile energy. William could no longer handle the exposure. The fragile ego that had driven him to commit massive federal fraud finally snapped. He slammed both hands down onto the dining table, rattling the silverware, and pushed himself to his feet, his face flushing a dangerous dark purple. "You do not understand anything about our world," William bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at Colin, completely ignoring the evidence on the table, defaulting to the arrogant entitlement he had used his entire life. "You sit there in your high ivory tower judging us, but you have no idea what it takes to survive in this circle. We had a certain standard to maintain. We had social obligations. Do you know what happens to a family when they lose their standing? Do you know how quickly these people turn on you?" He swept his hand toward his wife and daughter, demanding validation for his crimes. The money from the trust, the loans, even Tessa's accounts, those were necessary family sacrifices. They were investments in our future. We did what we had to do to ensure Ashley could secure a proper future so she could walk into your elite circles and belong. You should be thanking me. I built the perfect daughter for your family. It is not theft if it stays within the family. Arthur Sterling stood up. He did not rush. He did not slam his hands on the table. He simply rose from his chair with a slow, deliberate physical presence that instantly commanded the entire room. Because Arthur Sterling had built his international banking empire only after a long, distinguished career in the armed forces, retiring with 2 stars, a general in the United States Army. He possessed a deeply ingrained, unbreakable code of honor. He tolerated ruthless business negotiations, but he harbored an absolute, visceral hatred for cowardice and betrayal. He stared at William, the disgust radiating from him so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. I commanded men and women who died in the mud for this country, Arthur said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut right through William's blustering. I have written letters to grieving mothers. I have stood over flag-draped caskets. The uniform your daughter is wearing represents honor, discipline, and a willingness to lay down one's life for the person standing next to you. He took a single step forward, leaning slightly over the table. You stole from a soldier while she was deployed in a combat zone, Arthur stated, his words dripping with contempt. You siphoned blood money from your own flesh and blood so your spoiled, entitled daughter could buy shoes and parade around a country club. You are not a patriarch protecting his family. You are a pathetic, cowardly parasite. He slowly turned his head, deliberately breaking eye contact. I will not look at you for another second, Arthur commanded. You disgust me. If you ever contact my family or my bank again, I will personally ensure federal prosecutors have this entire file on their desks before breakfast. William collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The bluster vanished. The realization that he had just threatened and insulted a retired general and a billionaire banking executive finally penetrated his thick skull. He was ruined. There was no social circle left to save. Ashley realized the exact same thing. The massive, wealthy empire she thought she had conquered was actively turning its weapons upon her. She looked at Colin's hardened face, then at Arthur's disgusted posture, and her mind desperately scrambled for a lifeline. She reverted to the only defense mechanism she had ever successfully deployed. She burst into violent, theatrical tears. Ashley let out a loud, heaving sob, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with exaggerated force. She pushed her chair back and practically threw herself toward Colin, reaching out to grasp his suit jacket. Colin, please, Ashley wept, her voice breaking into a high, frantic whine. You have to understand. You have to listen to me. I was so terrified. I loved you so much, and your family was so perfect and so rich and so intimidating. They made me feel like I was not enough. I just wanted everything to be perfect for you. I wanted to be the perfect bride. I wanted to give you the flawless wedding you deserved. She looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks, pleading for the unconditional grace he had always given her. My father told me he had the money. He promised me. When the checks bounced, I panicked. I just panicked, Colin. I did not want to lose you. I made a terrible mistake, but I did it out of love. We can fix this. We can pay the money back. Please do not look at me like that. I am your wife. Colin looked down at her hands gripping his jacket. He did not pull away. He simply stared at her with an expression of profound, chilling emptiness. The love, the warmth, the gentle patience that had defined their entire relationship had been surgically removed. You are right about one thing, Colin said, his voice a quiet, dead whisper in the chaotic room. You are not enough. He reached up with his right hand, grasped the thick, heavy gold wedding band on his left ring finger, and with a single smooth motion pulled it off. He held the gold band suspended in the air for a brief second. Ashley stopped crying, her eyes locking onto the metal in paralyzed horror. She understood the finality of the gesture. She realized that tears could not extinguish the fire she had started. Colin lowered his hand and set the wedding ring precisely on top of the 50-page forensic audit folder in the center of the table. The gold clinked softly against the glossy cover. I am filing for an annulment, based on extreme premeditated financial fraud, Colin announced to the room. I will have my attorneys coordinate directly with Tessa to ensure every single dollar you stole from her deployment pay is fully recovered before this marriage is legally erased from existence. Do not ever speak to me again. Colin did not wait for a response. He did not look back to witness the devastation he had unleashed. He turned on his heel, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit, and walked deliberately toward the heavy glass doors. Arthur and Eleanor Sterling immediately flanked their son, closing ranks with the effortless, synchronized precision of old money protecting its own. They did not spare a single backward glance at the Wilson family. Ashley let out a piercing guttural shriek, raw and utterly unhinged, completely devoid of the curated elegance she had spent months perfecting. She scrambled out of her chair, her expensive silk dress catching on the armrest and tearing with a sharp rip, and lunged across the room, desperately grasping at the empty air behind her departing husband. "Colin, wait!" Ashley screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical sob. "Colin, please do not leave me. I can explain everything. I will do whatever you want." She hit the heavy glass doors just as they clicked shut behind the Sterlings. She slapped her palms flat against the thick tempered glass, her ruined, tear-streaked face pressing against the transparent barrier. Outside, in the main dining room, Colin and his parents strode purposefully through the sea of elegantly dressed patrons, never once breaking their stride. Ashley pounded her fists against the glass, her diamond engagement ring loudly striking the pane, begging for a man who had already erased her from his existence. The wealthy patrons at the candlelit tables stopped eating. Dozens of influential, powerful people turned their heads to watch the spectacle unfolding inside the transparent box. They stared at Ashley, watching her mascara run down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks as she clawed uselessly at the door, completely exposed, displayed like a frantic, trapped animal in a luxury zoo exhibit. At the table, the reality of the situation finally crashed down upon William. He stared blankly at the gold ring resting on the audit folder. The bridge loan was gone. The billionaire safety net had completely evaporated. The commercial fraud he had committed was now fully documented and exposed to a family with the power to bury him in federal litigation for the rest of his life. There was no country club charm left to deploy. There were no more lies to spin. He was staring directly at a federal prison sentence and an absolute bankruptcy. His paralyzing fear instantly metastasized into a violent, explosive rage. William let out a primal roar. He grabbed the heavy edge of the oak table with both hands and kicked his chair backward so violently it toppled over and crashed against the floor. He lunged across the center of the table, his eyes wide and bloodshot, aiming directly for Tessa. His sudden erratic movement swept across the pristine table setting. Fine bone china shattered onto the floor. Crystal wine glasses snapped at their stems. A full bottle of vintage Cabernet tipped over, sending a dark crimson wave across the white linen, the liquid splashing over the forged loan applications and soaking into the paper like fresh blood. "You ruined us!" William bellowed, his face contorted into a mask of pure, irrational hatred. He scrambled over the ruined dinner plates, his arms flailing wildly as he tried to reach her throat. "You vindictive, jealous monster! You destroyed your own sister. You destroyed this family. I will kill you for this." Tessa did not flinch. She did not step back. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of fear. Years of operating in hostile, unpredictable combat zones had conditioned her heart rate to remain perfectly steady under fire. She simply shifted her weight slightly to the left, standing her ground with perfect military posture. William, heavily intoxicated, overweight, and entirely blinded by his own rage, lost his footing on the spilled wine. He slipped hard against the polished oak, his arms crashing uselessly onto the table mere inches from her decorated uniform. He lay sprawled across the ruined setting, gasping for breath, his expensive suit jacket soaking up the spilled Cabernet. Tessa looked down at the man who had spent his entire life valuing an illusion of wealth over his own daughter. She felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no anger, only the cold, clinical satisfaction of a successfully executed operation. She reached inside the breast pocket of her uniform jacket and pulled out a single crisp, legally notarized document, sealed inside a clear protective sleeve. She held it deliberately in the air, making sure the overhead light caught the official county watermark. Then, with a smooth, calculated motion, she dropped the document directly onto the table, sliding it through the spilled wine until it stopped right beneath William's gasping red face. "Since you defaulted on the debt, drained the accounts, and just admitted to financial fraud in front of multiple witnesses," she stated, her voice ringing out with absolute authority, "I am officially foreclosing. You have 30 days to pack." Barbara, who had been sitting frozen, let out a choked, horrifying gasp. She leaned forward, her shaking hands hovering over the plastic sleeve, and read the bold black letters printed across the top of the document. Official 30-day notice to vacate. The complete, devastating reality finally breached her state of denial. The primary estate, the massive pillared suburban mansion where she hosted her charity galas and lorded her superiority over her neighbors, was legally gone. They were not homeowners negotiating a temporary setback. They were delinquent tenants being formally evicted by their own estranged daughter. "No," Barbara whispered, her voice completely hollow, her eyes fixed blindly on the eviction notice. "No, this cannot be happening. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. We have nowhere to live. You cannot take my house." "I already did, Mom," Tessa replied, her tone perfectly level. "And the clock starts right now." Before Barbara could launch into another fit of denial, the heavy glass doors swung open. It was not Colin returning. It was the general manager of the Capitol Grill, a tall, impeccably dressed man radiating furious professional authority, flanked by 2 large security guards in dark suits and earpieces. The chaotic, violent display inside the glass room had completely disrupted the dining experience of the entire restaurant. The screaming, the shattering glass, and William's pathetic lunge across the table had crossed the line from a private family dispute into a severe security liability. "Sir," the manager said, his voice hard and uncompromising as he looked at William, still struggling to push himself up from the wine-soaked table, "I must ask you to leave the premises immediately. Your behavior is completely unacceptable, and you are disturbing our other guests." William blinked, his brain struggling to process the intrusion. "Do you know who I am?" he slurred, his arrogant reflex kicking in even as he stood dripping with wine and failure. "I am William Wilson. I am a premier member here. You cannot throw me out." The manager did not even blink. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Wilson," he replied, his tone dripping with disdain. "And your premier membership is permanently revoked as of this exact second. You will gather your belongings and exit this building immediately, or I will have these officers physically drag you out, and I will personally call the police to press charges for the destruction of our property." The threat of police intervention finally pierced through William's rage. He realized that a police report would instantly trigger an investigation into the very federal fraud he was desperately trying to outrun. His shoulders slumped, the remaining fight draining out of him. He looked like a deflated, pathetic shell of a man. Barbara stood up mechanically, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and grabbed her expensive handbag, her eyes staring blankly at the floor, the shock and the humiliation rendering her catatonic. Ashley pushed herself away from the glass door, her tears having ruined her makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks across her cheeks. She looked at the abandoned wedding ring resting on the audit folder, then looked at Tessa. There was no more bluster. There were no more threats of billionaire lawyers. She had gambled her entire existence on a massive, sociopathic lie, and she had lost everything. The 2 security guards stepped into the room, their physical presence leaving no room for argument, and silently directed the Wilsons toward the exit. Tessa stepped back, clasped her hands behind her back, and watched them go. William, Barbara, and Ashley were forced to march directly through the center of the main dining room. Every single wealthy, influential patron in the restaurant stopped what they were doing to watch the procession. The Wilsons endured a grueling, agonizing walk of shame under the unforgiving glare of the exact social class they had destroyed themselves trying to impress. Their fraud, their bankruptcy, and their toxic dysfunction were laid bare for the entire city to witness. The security guards marched them out the front doors and pushed them into the freezing, biting wind of the cold night. They had no bridge loan. They had no wealthy in-laws. They had no home. They walked out into the darkness, financially ruined, socially ostracized, and completely destroyed. The manager turned back to Tessa, his expression softening slightly as he took in her crisp uniform. "I apologize for the disturbance, Major," he said respectfully. "We will add the damages to their final account balance." "Thank you," Tessa replied calmly, stepping forward to retrieve her tactical briefcase. "But do not worry about the damages. I will settle the bill for the table tonight. Consider it a parting gift." It took exactly 6 months for the full reality of their financial destruction to finalize. The federal fraud investigation, triggered by the unpaid commercial loans, swiftly dismantled any illusion William still held about his social standing or his ability to talk his way out of consequences. The exclusive private club, furious over the bounce checks and the massive public humiliation they had endured, aggressively sued William and Barbara for the unpaid $35,000 catering bill. Without their trust fund, their stolen credit lines, or the military hazard pay they had been siphoning, they had absolutely no way to pay the judgment. The resulting legal fees and court-ordered penalties completely decimated their already crumbling credit. Colin processed the annulment with lethal, unyielding efficiency. His family's high-powered legal team severed Ashley from the sterling banking fortune before she could even attempt to lay claim to a single dime. They buried her in airtight non-disclosure agreements and aggressive counterclaims that left her completely paralyzed. Stripped of their stolen assets, their luxury cars repossessed by angry lenders, and effectively blacklisted from every high society circle in the city, the three of them were forced to face the brutal reality of the working class they had always so openly despised. With the primary estate rightfully reclaimed by Tessa's corporate portfolio, William, Barbara, and Ashley were forced to relocate into a cramped, poorly insulated 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying industrial suburb. William, a man who once boasted about playing golf with senators and managing imaginary wealth, took a minimum wage job scanning inventory at a local discount hardware store. His days of bespoke suits were replaced by a stiff polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. Barbara, whose entire identity had revolved around hosting elite charity galas, was forced to work the customer service desk at a chain pharmacy, dealing daily with the exact demographic she used to mock. And Ashley, stripped of her designer wardrobe, her stolen engagement ring, and her wealthy husband, found herself working the cash register at a strip mall boutique. The fairy tale was dead, permanently replaced by the crushing, inescapable grind of basic survival. Tessa did not watch their downfall. She was entirely too busy building her own empire. With her combat tour officially concluded, she transitioned out of active duty and stepped fully into her role as the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Defense Logistics and Vanguard Real Estate. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to earn the love of a family that only valued her financial utility was completely gone. In its place, she found a profound, unshakable peace. Running her companies no longer felt like a contingency plan against her father's reckless spending. It was a thriving, globally expanding enterprise, built on military precision, fierce integrity, and raw, unfiltered hard work. They doubled their commercial acquisition portfolio in a single quarter, securing multimillion-dollar supply chain contracts across 3 continents. She moved her headquarters into a sprawling, state-of-the-art facility downtown. She no longer spent her nights worrying about fraudulent loans, toxic family dynamics, or wondering why she had never been good enough for her own parents. She spent them steering a highly profitable corporation toward international dominance, surrounded by people who respected her discipline and valued her leadership. Thanksgiving arrived with a crisp, clear chill in the air, but the inside of the lake house radiated warmth and genuine vibrant life. Tessa had completely renovated the property, stripping away the ostentatious, gaudy country club aesthetic her mother had favored, replacing it with clean modern architecture, natural stone and rich timber that honored the stunning beauty of the surrounding water. The massive stone fireplace roared to life, casting a golden, comforting glow across the spacious living room. The house was not filled with pretentious socialites or fake friends, desperately trying to impress one another with fabricated wealth. It was filled with her actual chosen family, her loyal military brothers and sisters, the people who had watched her back in hostile combat zones and truly understood the meaning of sacrifice, shared stories and cracked jokes on the deep leather sofas. Her brilliant corporate executive team laughed loudly in the expansive kitchen as they prepared the holiday feast. Moving with the same coordinated efficiency, they applied to their global supply routes. And sitting at the center island, reviewing a new commercial real estate acquisition file with a genuine relaxed smile was Colin. He had not just survived the brutal exposure of Ashley's grift. He had thrived. The shared experience of dismantling the Wilson family fraud had forged an unexpected, ironclad respect between them. They had bonded over a mutual appreciation for transparency, hard data, and ruthless accountability. He had become one of her closest, most reliable friends, and a trusted financial partner for Vanguard's domestic expansion strategy. The energy in the room was entirely authentic and undeniably powerful. There were no hidden agendas simmering beneath the surface. There were no desperate grabs for unearned status. And there were absolutely no lies holding the foundation together. Tessa poured a round of vintage bourbon, the amber liquid catching the firelight as she filled the heavy crystal glasses. She tapped her glass against the granite countertop, the sharp, clear ring instantly getting everyone's attention. The room quieted, turning their smiling, expectant faces toward her. She looked at the incredible, fiercely loyal people surrounding her, taking in the absolute perfection of the life she had built from the ashes of her past, and she raised her glass high into the air. "They stopped me at the door and told me I wasn't family," she said, her voice steady, resonant, and filled with absolute gratitude. "Turns out it was the greatest gift they ever gave me." And that is where the story ends. But the lesson inside it does not. Sometimes the most profound and painful betrayals come from the exact people who were supposed to protect us. For years, Tessa operated under the flawed belief that blood inherently dictated loyalty. She allowed her family's relentless pursuit of status and their toxic obsession with appearances to dictate her own value. But the truth she learned the hard way is this: respect cannot be bought with stolen money, and genuine love should never require you to sacrifice your own peace, your own sanity, or your own security. If you ever find yourself constantly shrinking to fit into a space where you are only valued for what can be extracted from you, then it is time to walk away. Real family does not drain your accounts. Real family does not fabricate malicious lies about your character. Real family does not use your darkest moments to fund their own illusions of grandeur. True family is built on a solid foundation of integrity, mutual respect, and authentic connection. It is the people who stand by your side when the reality is ugly, the people who share the trenches with you, and the ones who defend your honor when you are not even in the room. We cannot control the family we are born into, but we possess the absolute power to choose the family we keep. Severing ties with people who repeatedly bankrupt your spirit is never a sign of failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and strength. And that, my friends, brings me right back to my own quiet little garden, and the basket of red chilies I carried in from the field this morning. I told you at the start that the smallest, quietest pepper is so often the one that carries the most fire. Tessa was exactly that pepper. Her family looked at the quiet one, the one in the plain uniform with the dirt under her nails, and they decided she was harmless. They pushed her to the back of the basket and reached for the showy fruit up front. And for 34 years, with every insult and every theft, they kept planting cruelty in that quiet daughter's soil, never once stopping to wonder what was growing inside her. The day finally came when the harvest was due. And the soil, as it always does, gave each of them back exactly what they had planted. She had spent a lifetime planting patience, discipline, and quiet, honest work. And in the end, it gave her back her freedom and her peace. They had spent a lifetime planting greed and contempt, and in the end, that is precisely the crop they were left holding. So let me leave you with this before you go. Do you think Tessa went too far? Or do you think they reaped exactly what they had spent a lifetime sowing? Tell me down in the comments. And tell me where in the world you are listening from tonight. If this story moved you, if you have ever had to find the strength to walk away from people who only ever saw you as something to be used, then leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because there is always another story waiting, and another quiet morning out here in the garden. Take care of yourselves. And I will see you on the next one.